You ever notice how the moment you stop chasing someone, they suddenly show signs of life? It's not magic, it's not reverse psychology, it's because you've just done the one thing that terrifies the avoidant person more than anything else. You've stopped validating their emotional walls. Avoidants build a fortress, not always because they're cold or cruel, but because closeness feels dangerous. It threatens their illusion of control. It threatens the safety of emotional distance. When you chase them, they feel powerful, desired, but most importantly, they feel in control of how close you get and when. But when you stop chasing, when you stop trying to decode their silence, when you stop showing up to a game they never clearly invited you to play, they feel something they work hard to avoid: powerless, uncertain, seen. Because now you hold the power, not by manipulation, but by self-respect. You're not punishing them. You're simply choosing not to entertain breadcrumbs. And let me tell you something, people who fear intimacy often hate what they secretly crave the most. Someone who's no longer begging for their affection, but who remains unshakably calm in their own worth. When you stop chasing, you create a mirror, and what stares back at them is the thing they've been running from all along: the discomfort of genuine emotional responsibility. So if someone's running, let them. Because the right person, they won't run when you stand still. When someone has an avoidant attachment style, closeness can feel like a threat. It's not that they don't want connection deep down. Most of them do, but they fear what that connection might cost them: vulnerability, dependence, loss of control. So they create emotional distance. They pull away, become inconsistent, or send mixed signals, all as a way to protect themselves from feeling too exposed. Now, here's where it gets tricky. The more they pull away, the more someone who craves closeness is likely to chase. This dynamic sets off a toxic cycle where the avoidant gets to stay in control, and the other person ends up working overtime just to maintain the illusion of connection. Chasing, in this context, isn't always dramatic. It's not necessarily showing up at someone's door or sending a dozen texts. It's the subtle things: always initiating contact, overanalyzing their silences, bending your boundaries just to keep them comfortable. When you do this with someone who has avoidant tendencies, what you're really doing is reinforcing their strategy. You're teaching them that they can withhold affection or clarity and still keep your attention. In fact, your pursuit gives them a sense of power. They don't have to open up. They don't have to be consistent. They don't have to do the emotional labor because they know you'll fill in the gaps. This is what avoidants get used to. People chasing them, people working for crumbs of connection. It creates a false sense of safety for them. They get to keep one foot in and one foot out. They never have to fully engage because your energy is doing the heavy lifting. And that's the catch. Chasing doesn't bring you closer to them. It actually just deepens the gap. It tells them it's okay to stay behind their emotional walls because you'll come to them. Avoidants often respond to emotional pressure by withdrawing further. So the more you push for closeness, the more distant they become. This leaves you feeling anxious, confused, even inadequate, like you're not enough to make them stay. But it was never about your worth. It's about their fear of intimacy and their need to control the pace and intensity of connection. When you're always the one chasing, you're allowing that fear to dictate the entire relationship. You're giving them the role of the emotionally unavailable one and yourself the role of the emotional caretaker, a role they rely on but never truly appreciate. In the moment, it might feel like chasing is the only way to keep the relationship alive. But what's actually happening is that your pursuit becomes the reason they don't have to change. The dynamic stays broken because you're maintaining it. You think you're saving the connection, but really you're just holding up a structure that's designed to keep you at arm's length. The avoidant gets to feel powerful, secure in their avoidance, because your chasing confirms that they don't need to grow. They just need to stay distant, and you'll keep showing up. When you stop chasing someone with avoidant tendencies, something subtle but powerful begins to shift beneath the surface. For a long time, they've existed in a space where they held the emotional upper hand, not because they were more confident or more self-assured, but because they were better at running. They knew how to create space, how to withhold, how to use ambiguity to maintain control. And when someone chases them, it reinforces that control. They don't have to be clear, don't have to commit, don't have to step up emotionally, because the other person is doing all the emotional lifting. But the moment you stop playing that game, the energy changes. When you stop chasing, you take back your emotional authority. You're no longer reacting to their mixed signals or silence. You stop living in the space of anxiety and start living in your own clarity. This doesn't mean giving ultimatums or playing games. It simply means recognizing that your self-worth isn't dependent on how close someone decides to be with you today. That shift in energy creates a ripple effect. The avoidant person suddenly finds themselves in unfamiliar territory. They no longer feel in control of the connection because you're no longer feeding the imbalance. This can be deeply uncomfortable for someone who uses avoidance as a shield. Up until this point, they were able to keep you orbiting around them. They didn't have to offer clarity because your need for connection did all the work. But now, without your pursuit, they're left with space. And in that space, all the emotions they've been avoiding, doubt, insecurity, even regret, start to surface. The calm, quiet detachment you exhibit isn't just peace. To them, it's disruptive. It's a reflection of something they've worked hard not to confront, the fear that they're not capable of truly connecting without control. What's so impactful about stopping the chase is that it places the avoidant in front of a choice. Do they step forward, risk closeness, and engage with emotional vulnerability? Or do they let the connection die because it no longer operates on their terms? That choice reveals a lot, not just about how they feel about you, but about their willingness to grow. And that's where the power truly shifts. You're no longer waiting, hoping, overfunctioning. You're standing still, observing, discerning. For many avoidant types, that stillness can feel like abandonment, even though it's not. It's actually neutrality, emotional integrity. But because they're used to measuring their value by someone else's pursuit, your withdrawal can trigger confusion and even panic. Some may respond by reaching out, trying to reestablish the dynamic they were comfortable in. Others may retreat even further, proving that your stillness revealed the truth, not created it. Either way, the dynamic has changed not through force, but through your decision to step out of the imbalance. In that moment, they're no longer in charge. Your silence has more weight than your effort ever did. People with avoidant attachment styles often spend their lives trying to protect themselves from vulnerability. On the surface, they may appear independent, composed, and self-reliant, but underneath that exterior is a deep discomfort with emotional intimacy. They may crave closeness the way anyone else does, but the idea of actually allowing someone to get close, really close, triggers anxiety. To cope, they develop a set of defenses. They keep people at arm's length, shut down when things feel too intense, and avoid conversations that might require emotional openness. What they fear most isn't just the vulnerability itself. It's the responsibility that comes with someone seeing them fully. Emotional responsibility is about more than just being available. It's the ability to acknowledge someone else's needs, communicate honestly, and hold space for connection. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this level of presence can feel overwhelming. They often equate it with losing control or being suffocated. That's why they often prefer dynamics where the other person is doing all the emotional work. As long as you're chasing, over-explaining, or trying to fix the relationship, they don't have to do much. They can keep avoiding. But when you stop, when you no longer overextend yourself or compensate for their distance, that's when they come face to face with the part they've been avoiding. What it means to show up. Avoidance may act indifferent when someone pulls away, but deep down, that emotional shift unsettles them. Your absence removes the buffer that allowed them to disengage without consequence. Now, the emotional burden is no longer yours to carry, it's theirs. They are left with their own thoughts, their own emotional discomfort, and the realization that the connection is no longer sustained by your efforts. That's where fear kicks in. Not necessarily fear of losing you in the romantic sense, but fear of being exposed, fear of being accountable, fear of needing to express what they feel and risk not being able to manage the vulnerability that comes with it. Many avoidant people have gone through life without having to stretch emotionally. They've built identities around being the one who doesn't need much or who's better on their own. And they've often had partners who've unknowingly enabled this pattern by overcompensating. But when that enabling stops, when you step back and no longer chase, it brings up an uncomfortable truth. Connection requires reciprocity, and reciprocity requires responsibility. That means initiating, clarifying intentions, making space for someone else's emotional experience. These are things the avoidant may not feel equipped to do, but they now must face the choice of trying or losing the connection altogether. The irony is that avoidants often long for safe, deep love, but they don't know how to tolerate the emotional demands that come with it. When someone stops chasing them, they're forced to confront the gap between what they want and what they're willing to give. It's not rejection they fear most. It's the internal pressure of having to rise to the moment emotionally without hiding behind distance or control. Choosing to stop chasing someone who is emotionally unavailable isn't about playing games or punishing them. It's about reclaiming your clarity and honoring your self-respect. Often, in relationships where one person is avoidant and the other is more emotionally engaged, the dynamic becomes unbalanced. One person gives, explains, reaches out, and initiates while the other withdraws, withholds, or stays vague. Over time, that imbalance wears down your sense of self. You start questioning whether you're asking for too much, whether your emotional needs are a burden, or whether you're just not chill enough. But what's really happening is that you're trying to connect with someone who avoids connection to stay safe. When you stop chasing, you're not cutting them off out of bitterness. You're not creating distance to manipulate them. You're simply acknowledging that their inconsistency, their lack of effort, and their avoidance of emotional depth are not things you're willing to accommodate anymore. You're drawing a line, not out of spite, but from a place of self-awareness. That line says, I deserve reciprocity, I deserve effort, I deserve presence. And that message is powerful not just for them, but for you. Self-respect is often mistaken for coldness, especially by people who are used to being over-accommodated. When someone is no longer being pursued, it can feel jarring. They may interpret your stillness as punishment or passive aggression. But the reality is that you've simply stopped betraying yourself for the sake of keeping their comfort intact. You've stopped bending over backwards to decode their actions, to soften your words so they don't pull away, to hold back your needs, just to avoid making them uncomfortable. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. You're no longer in the relationship as a performer hoping for applause. You've stepped into a role that's grounded in emotional maturity, where your presence is not a bribe for love. And while the avoidant person may feel discomfort in your newfound calm, that discomfort is not your responsibility. You've done your part. You showed up. You reached out. You tried to connect in good faith. But now the energy has shifted, not because you've changed the rules, but because you've stopped playing by unspoken ones that were never fair to begin with. There's a subtle but essential difference between giving up and stepping back. Giving up comes from hopelessness. Stepping back comes from clarity. It's the realization that no matter how deeply you care for someone, connection can't be one-sided. You're not forcing them to open up. You're not demanding they meet your needs on command. You're just refusing to be the only one trying. And that refusal, rooted in self-respect, is what breaks the cycle. Not through control, not through silence as a weapon, but through a decision to value peace over chaos and to choose mutual effort over emotional guessing games. In doing so, you show that love is not earned by sacrifice alone, but by the willingness of two people to meet in the middle, without one constantly chasing the other. The most important truth that often gets lost in emotionally imbalanced relationships is this: the right connection doesn't require chasing. When someone is emotionally available and ready for a relationship, they don't leave you guessing. They don't keep pulling away just to see if you'll follow. They move toward you because that's what healthy, secure people do. They lean into closeness, not away from it. You don't need to prove your worth to them. You don't need to be good enough to get a response. You simply need to be yourself, and they meet you with energy that matches yours. Chasing, in contrast, becomes a dynamic where one person is always closing the distance. It starts with small things, initiating every conversation, forgiving repeated patterns of emotional unavailability, rationalizing bad behavior, waiting for a response that never comes. Before long, it becomes a pattern of emotional overfunctioning. You're doing everything to keep the connection alive, and they're doing the bare minimum to keep you hopeful. It's not love. It's a performance where your efforts become the only glue holding things together. But in a truly aligned connection, there's no need for that performance. You're not afraid to speak your mind because you're not worried about scaring someone off by being honest. You don't feel like you're walking on eggshells. You don't live in a constant state of anxiety, wondering if today they'll be warm or distant. The right person brings consistency, not confusion. And consistency creates emotional safety, something no amount of chasing can ever substitute for. When two people are emotionally aligned, the relationship flows more naturally. There's curiosity, mutual effort, vulnerability, and respect. Neither person needs to manipulate the dynamic to feel secure. There's no fear that taking a step back will cause the other to disappear, because both people are moving toward each other with equal intention. That's the hallmark of healthy connection, mutual willingness. You don't have to audition for it. You don't have to over-explain why you need clarity, affection, or consistency. You're met with understanding, not resistance. Avoidants often get caught in a loop where they only feel safe when the other person is doing all the work. But that kind of dynamic isn't sustainable. Eventually, the person who's always chasing burns out. And when they stop, it becomes clear that what was being called a relationship was actually just one person trying to hold things together. True connection doesn't require one person to constantly prove their value. It thrives when both people step in with courage, honesty, and emotional availability. The right relationship won't make you feel like love has to be earned through effort alone. It will remind you that being seen and valued is not something you chase. It's something you allow, something you share, and something that is willingly returned. And when you experience that, you realize how unnatural it ever was to chase someone just to be chosen. So if you've ever found yourself exhausted from trying to win over someone who keeps you at a distance, remember this: your calm presence is more powerful than any pursuit. When you stop chasing, you're not giving up on love. You're giving up on confusion. You're no longer volunteering to play a role that leaves you unseen and emotionally starved. Avoidants may hate when you stop chasing, but not because you've done something wrong. They hate it because it exposes the emotional